Okay, she's going.
All right, so I guess you can just start with the basics again. Just name, major, year, and where you're from.
I'm Katrin Marks. I'm majoring in architecture, so I'm in like the CAP program. I'm a freshman, and I'm from a really small town in Northwest Indiana, Union Mills. But I also consider myself like from Valpo and from LaPorte. So like I have like 3 like hometowns. So I'll talk about all those probably.
All right, and I guess how did you end up in this class?
It was part of like my advisor scheduled me as part of it, and I didn't even like get to look at the sections or choose them. He kind of just like threw me into one. So I had like no prior knowledge of like what this was going to be about until I was already like enrolled in it.
And you mentioned they sort of threw you in one. If you had like gone back and had like a choice, you probably have picked this class or this specific section.
I think I would have. Yeah. I haven't talked to anybody else really taking the same like honors 199. The only people that I've talked to have either been in the same section or like my roommate's taking one, but hers is on like eyewitness misidentification, and it just sounds really boring to me. So I don't know like what the other options are other than those 2, but I think out of anything, I probably would have chosen this one.
Yeah, when I was signing up, I just remember one of them being about like president's pets or something. So I definitely think this class is a little bit more important. So you mentioned probably you didn't really know what to expect since you just got thrown in it. Did you say like more important?
Sorry. I don't know. I don't even know if you can hear me right now. Everything that you just said.
I can hear
you. I missed like literally that entire question. Why? Is this my fault?
All right. So you mentioned you just. Could you hear me there or no?
I have not been able to hear anything. It sucks. I don't know if it's working now. My internet like is supposed to be good, but it's been like kind of terrible the past 2 days. I'm so sorry.
It's fine. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, hopefully it works.
Okay. All right. So to say it again, you mentioned you just sort of got thrown in this class. You probably didn't have much expectations heading into it, but for a class you just sort of got thrown into, would you say it exceeded your expectations and what you got out of it?
Oh yeah, I was when I saw that like one of the books that I had to get for this class was just called How to Be an Anti-Racist, I was like, oh thank God, because I didn't know like I knew what the class was, like I knew it was honors 199, but I didn't know anything about it until I was like ordering books, and like when I read the syllabus, I was like, okay, this will be good, and I've been really impressed with like the conversations that we've had and like the questions that we've asked and answered and everything that we've read. I just felt like it was put together really well, and it did exceed a lot of the expectations I had for it.
All right, shifting sort of the hometown questions. What do you say your neighborhood was like growing up in your hometown in general? You did mention you sort of consider yourself having like 3 hometowns. Can you talk about that a bit and just like if they're different?
Yeah, I live, I think my like actual town has like 1,500 people in it. We have a 4-way stop and like nothing else. And it's very Republican, and it's very like my high school is very small. My graduating class had like 71 people in it, and it was pretty much entirely white. I'm pretty sure my class had like was it just one black kid in it? Maybe. And so that was like, my family was one of the only like left-leaning families like in my neighborhood, which was weird because my views got challenged a lot by like the people that like I was growing up with and like going to school with. But I did spend a lot of time in two of like the towns that I live between that are bigger and are still pretty like diverse in terms of like politics, but they're still both mostly white. And so that kind of, I don't know, that kind of affects the way that I view things. But my hometown that I live in and that I do most of my things in is very, very small and very, very closed-minded.
You mentioned two of the bigger cities by you, Valparaiso and LaPorte. Did you notice like much of a difference between those two?
Valpo's bigger. It has like 30,000 people in it. I think LaPorte has 20,000. And I don't know anything about Valpo's like mayor or the way that Valpo is, but Valpo is pretty inclusive. It's closer to Chicago, but it's still far away. And it's closer to like more diverse areas. LaPorte's pretty white. LaPorte's a little bit smaller. And I think they both had protests during the summer, and there wasn't anything like major that happened in either one. They're both pretty moderate like towns as far as like there's not a lot that happens in either one that like really shakes things up. So not too extreme.
So since you said you mentioned growing up in your class had like one black person, it was almost entirely white. Did you think about race at all when you were growing up?
I did, not because of the school that I went to or the place that I lived, mostly just because of my like parents. They kind of made it something that we talked about, but not very often. I didn't learn about anything in school really. I didn't learn about anything really like about race like in the United States until like I was taking AP US history like my junior year of high school. So as far as like my education, there was like nothing that we ever talked about like at all.
And just like the small town you grew up in that you mentioned, did you witness racism there at all?
There wasn't a lot of, I mean, I would even say that there wasn't enough like diversity to even like have any like racially motivated like conversations. The one black kid that was in my class I was friends with, he goes to Ball State now. We're like besties. But he wasn't at my school until like 9th grade. And so before that, I'm pretty sure my entire class and like most of the other classes were entirely white. So like, it was just like I was living in like a bubble of like whiteness. And so it was never anything that we talked about.
And within like peers in your school, was there any conversations ever regarding race, or was it, since you mentioned like the area was mostly like monolithic ideologically, was there even many political conversations at all?
I think during the elections of like 2008 and 2012, a lot of people in my hometown didn't like Obama. And so that was where most of like any conversation about race happened, because people were like questioning, people like didn't like Obama, and then other people were questioning like why people didn't like Obama. They were like, is it because you're racist? That was kind of the extent of that until like the 2016 election, I guess. And then just a lot of the like response from the like national like legislature about race and about like just immigration and like all of that, like people would argue about that. And so I guess it was mostly just like political like arguing, just because people had different like views on like our president. And so like that was where most of that came from. But I think like until this year really, with like protests and everything, like I don't know, the conversations that I've heard have really escalated in the past like 5 years, but before that, not a ton.
And we talked about this some in my interview, just like some of the lessons we learned about housing segregation, like discrimination, redlining. Is that something you can like apply to some, like obviously not your hometown, but like Valparaiso or LaPorte? Can you apply that to there, or do you witness any of that?
There weren't like, since I don't live in either Valpo or LaPorte, I don't know exactly where things are, like where groups of people live, and mostly just because they're both like pretty white too. And each of them both just have like one public high school where everybody goes, pretty much. And so there's not like a ton of that I've seen in either one. And there's like no, like, when I look at like maps of like Valpo or LaPorte, there's never like a road or like a river or like a highway or whatever that like I've seen that separates certain groups. But I know like there are like certain neighborhoods that are like more affluent, more rundown, and I know like there's like some pockets in each one where that happens, but I don't know like the extent of like redlining or any like kind of implemented like racial issues in either one.
All right, moving on a bit. How would you say like the events of like 2020, obviously the pandemic protests, how would you say it's affected your point of view? Has anything like changed over the course of this year?
I think, well, like with the pandemic and the protests, is that what you said?
Yeah.
I think with the pandemic, it kind of just made me more like angry with certain people because like, I don't know, when you're supposed to wear a mask and a lot of people wear a mask and like abide by that, and then a lot of people don't, and there's just a lot of tension. You can see like kind of the way that people think based on whether or not they do wear one and like how they wear it, if they wear it like correctly or not. And so that kind of just made, like, I would look at people that I knew already and like kind of learn new things about them just based on that, which was weird to me. And then the protests, I went to one in LaPorte. I don't know how many Valpo had. I think I was gone for one of them because I went on a trip, or I was like working and I couldn't go to any of the ones in Valpo, but I went to one in LaPorte and I was pretty surprised by how many people were there, just because like, I don't know, I was pretty impressed by like LaPorte having a protest and actually having like a lot of people show up. But then there were like some issues like when I was there, and I was like, okay, this is how this is going to be. There was just a lot of arguing during it. But I don't think either the pandemic or the protests really like changed anything for me. I think it kind of just made me reevaluate like the place that I lived and like where people really stood on certain issues, because before that, like, it wasn't super obvious to me like how like Republican or Democratic either LaPorte or Valpo was.
And then with those protests, I'm sure it was a little smaller in like my city, but was there anything that happened that was like a source of controversy in your area or something that anyone in like a public position needed to like step up and show leadership towards?
The protest that I went to in LaPorte, I got there late because I was working, and we were just lined up like along the street by some bridge, and there was a counter protest the entire time. I don't know how many people were at the Black Lives Matter protest, but it was like a couple thousand, I think. And then there was like a counter protest of like maybe 50 like Trump supporters on the other side of the street, like holding guns and like flags and stuff. So that was weird. And there was a lot of like tension between those two groups. And so a lot of the like police officers that were there during that day anyway, like, were spending a lot of their time like kind of monitoring to make sure that like nothing escalated. And then we went to this like block that they had blocked off, and there was supposed to be like a series of like speeches by certain people, but the organizers of this protest were white. There were like 5 of them. They were all like white guys, which was weird to me because there were a lot of Black people attending the protest that was like supposed to be for them. And then this one dude had like a megaphone. He was like the main like organizer of this thing. And then there were 2 guys standing right by me, 2 like Black guys, and they wanted to talk because it was supposed to be like a pretty open like conversation. At least that's how I thought it was going to be. And then the white organizers were like yelling at them, and then everybody in the like audience was kind of yelling at the organizers because they were like, well, if you're going to have this protest for Black Lives Matter, you should let the 2 Black men speak, and you shouldn't like silence them because that goes against the whole point. And then the like cops were yelling at people because people were just screaming, and then somehow that got figured out. And then they wanted to have like a moment of silence, like a 30-second like kneel, where everybody just like kind of got down and like was quiet for a while. And I don't know how many cops were there. I think it was like 20, and like half of them knelt, and then a lot of the people at the protests were standing up yelling at the other cops to kneel, and they weren't, and they kind of were just like laughing. And so then like the 30-second silence thing never happened, and they were just mad and everybody was angry, and we all kind of like got kicked out and had to leave.
I know in like one of our discussions in the class, we've sort of talked, I think, multiple times about how it's important to center Black voices. So we like discussed that in class. Did that sort of like make you think of the protests when people, the Black voices, weren't allowed to speak?
Yeah, it definitely made me think of that, because that was the only like time that I've ever experienced anything like that, like firsthand. I was like, yeah, no, that happened to me. I think I mentioned it during class once. I was like, yeah, I was at a Black Lives Matter protest that was supposed to be about Black lives, and then they weren't letting Black people speak. And so, like, I knew it was problematic at the time, because, like, it was, I don't know, it just seemed like really wrong. And then in class, when we talked about it being like a bigger issue, I was like, yeah, I've definitely seen that before.
And at those protests, obviously every protest sort of different, and then the way the police handled it sort of different. How do you feel like their presence at your protest was? Were they more on the side of the people that were like peacefully marching, or were they more against it? How do you feel like they interacted with people there?
They were kind of just there. It wasn't, I know like some protests were kind of more geared toward like both Black Lives Matter and like kind of anti-police. But I think the organizers for the protest in LaPorte like worked with the police to put it on. And so like ours wasn't anything about like being anti-police or anything. So they weren't like really monitoring us or anything. Like they weren't like watching us too closely. They were kind of just there in case anything happened. But you could tell that like they weren't trying to like support the cause that we were there for. They were there just because they like had to be. But they weren't like angry with us because we weren't like yelling at them. It was kind of just like neutral until they didn't like kneel. That was really the only thing that made anybody angry with them.
Did it feel like some of the police were more on your side than others, and it was sort of a mixture in that regard?
Yeah, there were I think it was like 5 that didn't like participate, and they kind of just like walked away, and the rest of them like were with us. They weren't like trying to be super like part of the protest. Like they were still separated. They were standing like in a different area than we were. And I know if you're familiar with where Michigan City is, it's pretty close to LaPorte, and I don't consider that like a hometown of mine, but they had a protest there, and like their police officers like tried to integrate as like part of the protest, and like they were like with them doing everything. And that's not how it was in LaPorte. But it wasn't like there wasn't like any adversity like between the two groups, but they weren't like coming together with us or anything.
Mm-hmm. And looking at Ball State some, how would you feel about like the way the administration has handled some of the racial issues in the area and their responses to some of those?
I definitely feel like it's because they've been pressured to. I feel like if there was no pressure for them to respond to things, that I don't think they would respond. And I don't know how accurate that is because I don't like know the president or anything. But it does seem really inadequate. When we were reading the articles like in the unit that was about institutional racism, I definitely felt like that's how it was at Ball State, especially like last year when a professor called the police on like a Black student for not moving seats or something. I thought their response to that was really weak. And I think that they are doing kind of the bare minimum for what they need to do.
And then one of the things it asks, or one of the questions, how do you feel about like the diversity at Ball State? Because I know it's more of a majority white institution. Is that something you even really think about since the area you grew up in was predominantly white?
I mean, Ball State to me is the most diverse place that I've ever spent like an extended period of time in. I mean, like I've traveled places that are more diverse, but like in terms of places that I've lived, I've only lived in one place my entire life. And so being at Ball State and seeing more than like just a handful of Black students is like really weird for me because I haven't experienced it, but it feels good to be a part of something that's more diverse, even if it's not really that diverse, like in terms of like other institutions. And I don't know, like I've had some conversations about it, like in the Honors College. Outside of the Honors College, I really haven't talked about it at all. But like with the classes that I've had within the Honors College, we've talked about it like quite a bit. So I think they're doing a lot better of a job of talking about it than like my high school did, but I'm not surprised about that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, like how people's perspectives are different towards like the diversity at Ball State. Because for me, it's probably like slightly more diverse in the place I grew up. One of my good friends in college, also from Fort Wayne, and he said he got here and it's surprising because just white people everywhere because he went to like a different high school on like the South Side. So like just different environment. Then how do you feel like Ball State does when it comes to like creating cultures of inclusivity?
I think I've been surprised by the amount of like meetings that there have been, or like clubs that there are to kind of promote like diverse groups. Or there's like I think there's like a Black Student Union or like Black Student Association, like the big four that we talk about, the different like groups. That was never something that I had at my high school. So I feel like having that is a good thing, but I also kind of feel like I don't know what college doesn't have stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a lot of the time like up to the students to kind of put it together. And I don't know whether or not that's a bad thing. I feel like the university should promote it because it kind of feels like it's those groups versus the university like sometimes. And so I kind of wish like it would be more integrated, but I don't know exactly how it is because I'm not a part of any of those groups. But it's nice to see that they are here because like my high school didn't have anything like that.
Do you think the university does a good enough job centering those voices, giving them a large enough platform and positions of power on campus?
I think they've gotten better at it. Like Dr. Bartlett has sent us links to like Zoom meetings where they've talked about it exclusively. And I think I've seen like meeting invitations for like specifically like Black student voices and stuff. And so I've thought that's like a good thing that they've done. I don't even know what question I'm answering, if I'm even answering your question at all.
I just asked, like, do you feel like the university does a good enough job centering these voices and giving them like positions of power?
Yeah, I think they're doing a better job at it than they were. I don't know if it's because they're getting pressure to, and it's because like we're living in a time where people like want that more than ever. And even if it is, I mean, it's still good that they're doing it. I don't remember when I heard about this. They're building the new multicultural center, and I think that since they're putting that like right next to the library, like in the middle of campus, it's a really good thing that they're doing because I don't even know where like the old one is. I don't know if I've ever seen it or like ever walked past it, and so I think like doing that is a big step, like putting it in a place where it's more accessible, and I think they are moving in the right direction. I don't think they're there yet, but they're getting there, I think.
Yeah, I saw the old building like once and it was like down past the student center and like what looked like a house. So way out there. What was like, and something I noticed a lot of like the events we get like notified about and get in our emails. A lot of it seems to be like honors college only. I'm not sure if you know, but do regular students at Ball State get an opportunity to like participate in some of the stuff regarding like diversity and inclusion like this?
I don't know. I know for me, like as soon as I step outside of the honors college, it feels like those conversations don't happen. I know they had like a series of meetings with different groups that lived like in Doherty. And I went to one that was just like for women, and there were like 4 people there. And so like, I don't know if they promote anything outside of the honors college. I haven't talked to anybody about it. So I don't know exactly how it is, but I know like from the classes that I have that are within the honors college and the classes that I have outside of it, there's a clear difference in like how much race or like anything like diversity at all, like how often that comes up in conversation.
And just like looking at this class, what do you feel like you've taken most from this semester in one course?
I think, let me look at the list. Learning about like the redlining in Muncie, like really, like it was surprising to me because they've taken like really small steps pretty much since slavery was abolished to like actually make things equal. And so like there have just been like steps that I didn't know existed that I've learned about in this class, that I've been surprised like even happened. I think one unit that I thought was really important was talking about like whiteness, and how like every group is racist, and like there was a video that we watched like from Hassan Minaj, and I think he's wonderful, talking about how racist people are like in his culture, and so like every group can be like extremely racist, but the only group that really has any power because of it like are white people. And so I started thinking about it as like not talking about just like black people all the time when we were talking about racism, but talking about white people and how like whiteness is a race and how like we have power because of like what happened in like the 1400s. And I just thought that was really profound, and it really like not changed my mind on anything, but definitely like offered a new perspective that I hadn't thought about before.
And do you feel like this class has like broadened your perspective a lot? And like since the area you grew up in was like almost entirely white, or do you feel like you already like like doing your research and knew a lot about other stuff beforehand?
I did a lot of my own research beforehand, and so I was very like I would have considered myself anti-racist like before this class and like for like the past like few years, and so this class like didn't change my mind on anything, but it definitely offered like it went a lot deeper into things than I would have on my own, and there were things that I learned about, like the word Caucasian being racist and stuff like that, that I probably wouldn't have learned on my own, and that offered a lot of like new, not necessarily like new ways of thinking about things, but new things to think about, in terms of like race and anti-racism. And it really like, I don't know, it offered a lot of new stuff for me, and it helped out a lot.
How would you say this, like the discussions that we have in this class and some like the conversations, what they're centered around, vary from some that you've had in the past, or like what's new?
When I've talked about race in the past, it's been either like with my parents or with like maybe 3 friends that I have that I know like kind of view things more or less the same as me. Other than that, it's been like kind of arguing with people about things. And I feel weird about arguing with people about race because I am white, and so it seems like it's not my place to talk about it, even though I know it has to be. What am I answering? What question did you just ask me? I'm so sorry.
Like how are like the conversations and like the topics the class is centered around different from like topics around race that you're used to?
This class has been especially helpful because of how like every week we had like something different to talk about. So the discussion was always based around like one specific thing, kind of, even though we did branch out like a bit every week. But it was nice to talk about like one thing for that long, especially like in every unit. Like we would have like 4 or 5 weeks where we would talk about like whiteness as a race or like institutional racism. And so it was nice to get like a deeper, like longer conversation about it, because none of my conversations have been like super long. So the fact that this class was like so focused on like a certain issue at one time, and like we could really talk about like one issue for like an hour or longer at a time, that was really helpful and different for me.
And you mentioned like a little bit in like the cities near you, you didn't really like witness as much with like the housing discrimination and how it's like shaped those cities necessarily. So what do you like relate it to when we have conversations, or do you not relate it to anything else at all when we talk about like housing discrimination in Muncie, like how like the demographics have been affected by that?
I guess I don't think about it, not in my own town, like in my own hometown at all, because like there's nothing that's even there in my hometown. And then since like Valpo and LaPorte are so white, I didn't relate it to those. But Michigan City is, I don't know if it's majority black, but it's like very integrated compared to Valpo or LaPorte. And so I kind of thought about it in terms of Michigan City, but I'm not as familiar with Michigan City, so like I was trying to relate it to it. but I didn't spend a whole lot of time like relating it to another town that I'm more familiar with. I kind of just really focused on Muncie and like how it was there, because like if I couldn't relate it to anything that I like had on my own, I kind of really just had to think about Muncie. And so I looked at like just Muncie a lot, but I couldn't like relate it to my own experience.
And like obviously my city's bigger, so you have different areas where you can witness different things and how they play out. I know the town you're from, it sounds like it's sort of in the Chicago area. And I know in that area, a lot of the cities are a little smaller, but like Gary, for example, is sort of like notorious for like being very poor. And I was wondering if you like witnessed how like communities in that area, some of them are like poor and like predominantly Black, if they like receive less and worse educational systems and what types of inequalities there are in those areas. I wonder if you knew anything about that.
Yeah, we have a train that runs to Chicago. It starts in South Bend. And so whenever I go up to Chicago, I take the South Shore line up there. And so when you get like, I take it from Michigan City, which is already like pretty diverse. But as you go further up to Chicago, like you go through Gary and like Hammond, like East Chicago, Whiting, like all those cities, and you can tell like, you can see race, first of all, like you can see like the white people in an area or like the Black people in an area, and then you can see like kind of how well like that city's taken care of. I know like Hammond is very diverse and it's very poor, and so I think, as far as I know, if you like are a child that like has grown up in Hammond, like you get like your college education like completely paid for, because like that's like the first step that they're trying to take to like kind of offer people more education. But like in a lot of the towns like going up to Chicago, you can tell that like they're not making much of an effort to like better their like residents like situation. Like in Gary, there's not really anything that's being offered to the people that live there, and you can tell.
And do you see anything being done about situations like that, maybe like the next 5 or 10 years? Do you think there's any leadership that like steps in and implements policies? Like, I know you mentioned like people in Hammond, they get their college education paid for, which is obviously going to help people there a lot. But do you think any more policies like that are going to be implemented in areas like that?
I hope so. I'm not like at all familiar with any of those towns really at all. I think in Valpo they're making an effort to do some things. Like I don't know the mayor. I don't even know who it is. But my friend lives in Valpo, and she's talked about it a bit because she like works for him or something. I don't know. And so as far as like, I know Valpo is doing something. I don't think LaPorte's really doing anything. But I hope like as like Valpo does stuff, like it kind of starts to spread further like west, because I think those are like cities that really need like the most help. They're like really diverse up by Chicago and they're really poor. So I hope something happens, but I don't know if it'll be as soon as 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Like from this class, which lessons and things you learned do you think like stood out the most to you?
For me, the lesson on whiteness, like the unit on whiteness, really stood out to me because it offered me a different way of thinking about race. And so that one was pretty big. And then I've always thought about like institutional racism and like systemic racism, but some of the stuff that we read and like watched like in that unit really offered me like more to think about. And so I think those two were the ones that really stood out the most to me.
Yeah, to me as well. There's not that often conversations about whiteness as like race, and do you think a lot of that results from white people a lot of times not viewing themselves as being racist?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with people not thinking that, with white people not thinking that like race applies to them. Kind of like we're the standard and like other people are race, but we're not. I think that's definitely like really predominant around the people that I live by and like around. I don't think a lot of the white people that I know think about themselves as like part of the conversation on racism. They kind of like separate themselves from it.
All right. And then like so far, like just after taking this class, have you noticed like anything you've like implemented like into conversations at all where you've like brought up something you learned from this class?
Oh yeah. I didn't go to any like Thanksgivings with my family. I did like with my immediate family, but I kind of just when I talked to my immediate family about it, I kind of just brought up stuff that I learned um, that like they kind of had the same reaction to it that I did, just kind of like surprised, but not that surprised. Um, and there's never been like any like hard conversation I've had with anyone since then about like stuff that um, like I want to change their minds about because I just haven't been around anybody. Like I haven't been around that many people since I've been home, and so I haven't had to have that conversation with anyone. But I definitely think I will, like soon when I am around like my extended family again, and they decide to be racist because they will.
And you feel like this class should be made like maybe more available to people outside the honors college in a class that's more commonly taught throughout the university?
Yeah, I definitely think this should be something that I don't even think like it should have been like an option for honors 199. Like I think every honors kid should have taken it. And I definitely think that like every student on campus should take it.
And how much of the stuff that we learn in this class do you think maybe should be even like implemented into education at a younger age and taught throughout like high schools and middle schools? In
Probably
your
all of
opinion?
it. I think when we learn about like local history, like in like middle school or like elementary school, like we should talk about why like school districts are the way that they are, like why um, I don't know why like cities and like states are like laid out the way that they are, like because of race. Because like I don't know, race kind of built everything to be the way that it is. And so I think if we kind of just ignore it until like you're in college, there are so many people who don't go to college who like don't have the conversation and like don't ever hear about it. So I definitely think like a lot of the stuff that we learn in this class, you should at least learn in high school, if not earlier.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Do you see a lot of the issues in like the Muncie community where it comes to like the way housing is and the way the history of the city's affected it presently? Do you think any of that's going to get fixed in upcoming years, or do you think there'll be a greater focus on it?
I mean, I don't know what goes on in like Muncie or Delaware County. Um, and I know like Delaware County went red like in this election. And I accidentally drove through this like parade one time where like the sidewalks were just like lined with people and that were like all really close together and nobody was wearing any masks. And like it was weird and it just seemed like racist to me. There were a lot of like Trump flags and stuff. And um, so I think if anything did like if like a mayor of Muncie like did try to like do anything like more progressive and like try to kind of move in that direction, I think there would be a lot of backlash from people that live here. So even if it like was, I don't know, like even if someone like tried to do it, like I don't even know how the people here would react to it. It doesn't seem like they would react very well. So I don't even know if it's possible that soon.
How do you feel like the conversation around race has like shifted in recent months, or especially since like the protests in June? How do you feel like it shifted across the country? Do you feel like it's become more commonplace to be supportive of things like Black Lives Matter?
I don't know if I don't know how many people have like changed their minds on things in recent months because of that. I feel like with social media, I've seen a lot of like performance activism with people just like kind of posting like one or two things and then like not doing anything. And it's not that I think like everybody has to like be like completely active in their community. Um, but I think it's been a conversation that more people have had to have because of like the protests. Like I worked at like one of those like small like walk up like ice cream joints that you see in like every small town. Like I worked at one in LaPorte, and my boss was very anti like the Black Lives Matter movement. And I left work one day to go to the protest, and I remember she was talking about how all like the crazy people out there were like blocking the streets and stuff. And I was like, well, I'm going there after this. And so like she was someone that I had to have that conversation with. And so I think like I hope that people have had to have like conversations that kind of open up other people's minds a bit. I don't think I changed anybody's mind. I hope like somebody did. I don't know. I don't know if it kind of like united things more or just like polarized people more. I don't know what it did.
Do you think a lot of people of like an older generation already have their mindset regarding these issues, and it's just more important to educate people that are younger that are still more open-minded?
Yes, I think that exactly, because any of the older people that I know, like it's so hard to change anybody's mind that's like already been thinking about stuff for that long, and especially like if they did live in an era that was like arguably more racist than it is now, their their argument can just be like, well, look at how much things have improved since the 60s. Like, yeah, things have improved, but like that doesn't mean that there's still room to grow. But I think like if you talk to someone that's old enough to like have seen change like happen, they're probably kind of pretty set in their mind that like that's all that we need to do. Whereas like the younger people that I've talked to have been more easy to kind of have a conversation about it and see each other's point of view.
Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, like, how do you see this class like sticking with you years down the road?
I think, I don't know, there's a lot of specific stuff that we've like learned about that I could use to, I don't know, most of like in every reflection paper that I've written for this class, like when I have to talk about like what I've gained from it, I often talk about like how I'm going to use what I've learned like when I do talk to people, because I think that's the most important thing that you can do is just like talk to people about stuff, because it's the only way that like you can get things to change, if you get people to vote and stuff like that. So I think a lot of it will stick with me in terms of like how I talk to people about things and how I approach certain conversations and certain topics, because like since this class was discussion based, it was just a lot of talking about it, and I think that helped me a lot.
All right, I think that's all I really have to ask for right now.
Okay.
All right.